in that category of what I call friends of BME, insofar as we like each other, we do stuff together, and she's helped us with various events, informally or informally, over the last couple of years. So it's very much sort of she's part of our family, if you like. So, and it's a beautiful looking event. The films we've looked at together really should be quite special, I think. So Raisa's going to obviously introduce the films, and then between each film she'll just say a couple of words, rather than doing a big intro at the beginning for all of the 5 films we're going to see tonight. Raisa, I imagine many of you will know her, but she's in the process of finishing her thesis, she tells me, which is on the subject of Soviet documentary. And Raisa is a film historian, and she's actually doing her PhD at Yale, but is lucky enough for us. Spends a lot of time in London and spends a lot of time with us. So I think I'll just hand over to Raisa, and then I will do the little bit of fiddling over here as we go between the films. So Raisa Sidenova.
Hi. First of all, thank you very much to all of you for coming on this Friday night. Who knew there would be so much interest in Soviet documentary? But first of all, I would like to thank BME for hosting and sponsoring this event, Michael Temple and Sarah Joshi. Also, I would like to thank 2 people who were sort of without whom none of this would happen, because they were sort of gave the initial impulse and sort of and encouragement, and that is Chris Berry and Laura Mulvey. And I should say that we got one of the copies of the films from the Latvian National Film Institute, so thanks to them for collaborating and providing us the copy, and one of the other copies come from Open Society. So in the beginning, I would just like to say a couple of words how this program is structured, why it's structured this way, and maybe give you a little bit about Soviet poetic documentary. To some extent, in the beginning, I wanted to ask you, I know that you're a very diverse crowd, have any of you seen any Soviet documentaries from the period after 1950 to the collapse of the Soviet Union? Let's say 85, because I know more people saw films from the perestroika period. Okay, so not that many of you, but so to some extent, I think this program is a sample of Soviet poetic films. It's not in any way a comprehensive program. It's only 5 films from 3 different studios, from 6 different filmmakers. So it will give you a sense of what poetic documentary movement was, and hopefully after watching this program you would be inspired and maybe do a little bit more research and see other films as well. Some of them, there are a number of films available online, but so it is a very sort of obscure topic, but I would like to sort of maybe give you an idea of what poetic documentary means in the Soviet context. And to some extent, obviously, the question of poetic cinema is a very elusive one. We have, allusions to poetic cinema in different national contexts. So for Soviet cinema, it is both sort of typical to what you would think of poetic documentary, and also peculiar and connected to the historical context in which these films were produced. So in my work, I work on the dissertation on the history and the evolution of poetic documentary in Soviet cinema. I think that the poetic mode becomes a privileged mode of documentary in the Soviet Union from around the early 1960s. And I think to some extent poetic documentary is still a privileged mode in contemporary Russian documentary as well. And it is a very broad term. It means a lot and it also means very little. But there are 2 qualities that I think could be helpful in thinking about what poetic documentary is. And it is the idea of an authorial position. So it is, in a way, a tour cinema. So that's why on the handout that I prepared for you, I gave you just a little bit information on each of the filmmaker. And to some extent, I assume that the names of those filmmakers wouldn't probably say much to you, but in that period, those were the authors, the filmmakers that were famous, that were they were the leaders of Soviet poetic documentary movement. On the other hand, so we have filmmakers on the one hand, we have films on the other that we're going to see and hopefully discuss after the screening. And then the third component to this history is the institutions, the studios where they worked. And for this particular program, I tried to pick 3 studios that were also the leaders of Soviet poetic documentary. So we will see 2 films produced at the Riga Film Studio, which is in Latvia. One film from Sverdlovsk Film Studio, which is Sverdlovsk is now Yekaterinburg, which is a city in Russia. And the last studio is Kyrgyz Film, which is now in Kyrgyzstan, in Central Asia. So so in that regard, the selection is not, it's not random. These studios were at different points throughout this 30-year period were leaders of the poetic movement. Naum Kleiman, the director of the Moscow Film Museum, that some of you might know, sort of has this metaphor about Soviet culture being a really long pipe with that has holes in different places. So when the water streams along this pipe, the state tries to plug the holes. So while plugging the holes in one place, water streams out of another hole in a different place. So it's not a very beautiful metaphor, but I think it somehow is helpful, because what this program represents, I think what I was trying to show you is the evolution of poetic documentary. So we start in 1962 in Latvia, and then it moves to Kyrgyzia, and then it moves to Sverdlovsk. So and we end again in Latvia. So we will see how this poetic documentary movement is changing. So one thing, so it's an evolution from, to some extent, socialist realist practice to a more sort of poetic abstract practice. And it is in a way a Soviet observational cinema. So it is a Soviet verite, if you wish. So if you know history of world documentary and familiar with the cinema verite movement that starts across the world in the 1960s, you would sort of sense some of the influences and some of the ideas that are present in North American cinema verite or in European cinema verite in some of these films. But one of the things that I wanted to point out, one of the last things that I wanted to point out, is that when we think of cinema verite, it's a very technologically driven form, right? So because cinema verite, the emergence of cinema verite is always connected to the development of 16mm cameras and synchronized sound equipment. So the Soviet filmmakers didn't have any of that. So all of the films that you're going to see were made with 35mm cameras. Most of them were made with 2 Russian types of cameras that were made after some Western cameras, but they were still quite bulky, quite heavy, quite noisy. So, but they still tried to experiment with the cinematic observation. So, yeah, so this is one of the things, and hidden camera is one of the sort of methods that they used to achieve this observational effect. So I will introduce each film separately, so I hope it will be a little easier for you to follow the program in that way. And then hopefully we'll have some time for discussion. I'm very interested in hearing your opinions about these films. And yeah, so please stick around for the discussion. So the very first film, the first film that we're going to see is called Construction. It's from 1962, and it's made by this filmmaker called August Browns, who was one of the founders of what was called the Riga School of Poetic Documentary. And the film is the second film in a trilogy of short films about construction and labor in Latvia in the early 1960s. And in this film, you can see very clearly this transition from socialist realism to the poetic world. And I guess three things that I would like you to pay attention to is the use of sync sound in the film, visual metaphors that Browns is using, and the lyrical tone of the narration, which I hope comes across in the subtitles. Okay, so we can.
Thank you very much.